need to wake up before it's too late. America's entering a dark digital dystopia, and I think Jordan Peterson's last testimony in Congress will be remembered as one of the most dire alarm bells against it. During a hearing on the weaponization of the federal government just a few days ago, Jordan just showed America's congressmen the scary totalitarianism of China as a warning to where we're headed. That's a lot we need to talk about, but watch this clip before we get into it.
I'm not here to talk about January 6th or about any particular threat, insurrection, or protest, political or ideological, real or imaginary. I'm here to talk about the already extant and expanding collusion of government and corporation in restricting the individual freedom and autonomy upon which the productive, generous, and stable psyche, economy, and state are themselves necessarily founded. I'll begin my comments, therefore, in the most general terms to shed light on the mounting problem. There are now 700 million CCTVs in China under the rule of the Communist Party. The system to which those electronic eyes are attached is the most complete state apparatus of surveillance yet imagined, with the ability not only to recognize faces at a distance, but gait itself when facial features are hidden or obscured. Such capability can and will soon be augmented to the point where the movement of eyes themselves, monitored by high-resolution and intelligent cameras, will soon be sufficient to identify any aware and active party. The demented, naive, and prideful engineers who so enthusiastically helped build this system call it Skynet, after the rogue and all-seeing technology that took such a dreadfully wrong turn in the famous science fiction movie Terminator series, featuring artificially intelligent robot intelligences hell-bent on protecting themselves by destroying humanity. The name also references a well-known Chinese phrase describing the reach of the divine itself. The net of heaven is vast, yet it misses nothing, which aptly describes the capabilities of the new state apparatus. The system is integrated with the so-called Chinese social credit system, which awards its involuntary participants with a score indicating their compliance with the dictates of the Chinese Communist Party, allowing for full control over access to everything they possess electronically, most ominously their savings and their access to travel. Certainly all modern means of travel, but increasingly as the electronic gates come up, even by walking. If you're Chinese or a visitor, your access to the world can be reduced to zero if your social credit score falls beyond an arbitrary minimum. This allows you purposefully to be shut out of all activities that can be virtualized. And in a rapidly virtualizing world, this increasingly means all activities: driving, shopping, working, eating, finding shelter, even fraternizing with friends and family, as merely being in the presence of someone with a low social credit score means that your own score can be lowered. This has also opened up the opportunity for the government to extract slave-like labor from its citizens, so burdened, as the donation of free work to the state still constitute one means by which erring Chinese men and women can increase their score and remain part of human society. This is precisely the payment system most desired by the most tyrannical, not the work for me and benefit thereby that constitutes the contractual arrangement undertaken by free and sovereign citizens, but the work for me and I will lift the deprivation I imposed that has always been the leitmotif of the slaver.
You know what makes that such a frightening thought? Far before Jordan Peterson sent out these warnings, we've had people like Edward Snowden and Julian Assange over a decade ago call out an emerging surveillance state just as it started to spread its digital tentacles. Assange in particularly showed China as an example of what the US was becoming, and Snowden pulled the curtains on how the United States was moving in a similar direction as China, with mass surveillance and data mining on citizens across the world. You could say that it's a critical juncture that the United States has yet to cross, but in less optimistic terms, it wasn't primed and prepared to cross it until now. That juncture's integrating digital surveillance data into a social credit system like China's. I'm not looking into a crystal ball. All I'm doing is seeing the trajectory of where we're headed and extrapolating from it. You know why I say that? Look around you. You see it with the potential rise of CBDCs, the increasing market share of electric vehicles, and a digital ecosystem of devices in every house. The social credit system has not arrived in the US because it was never logistically and technically possible until now. Remember one thing when we're speaking about China, it is almost diametrically opposed to every foundational principle that defines the United States, whether it be freedom of consciousness, the right to privacy, or the right to private property. I mean, imagine for a state that literally controlled and capped how many children you could have, the most private and personal of decisions until 2016 under the one-child policy. What other domain of personal freedom and individuality is there left? Clearly none, and if America or any other nation were to follow that dreadful example, even a step forward, it could mean that we're truly living in one of the last few years of freedom. It's a state where your identity, digital footprint, and your financial sustenance is just one step away from becoming a lever that the state has to control you. And its dreaded social credit system uses both the carrot and the stick to keep a population in line. One of the most egregious of these government overreach with the help of a person's digital data is the public shaming of Chinese dissenters, offenders, or defaulters that happens in public places by displaying their photos and details on giant billboards. In China, you're literally doxxed by your own government for falling out of line and shunned by a society that is left with no other choice than to comply. One of the most extreme manifestations of this digital surveillance also happens to be tied to the most grave humanitarian crises in modern times that no one seems to talk about. That is the forced labor and detention of over 1.3 million Uyghur Muslims in China's Xinjiang province. Every step of the way, facial recognition, technology, and AI-based security cameras track movements of these people inside what is practically a scarier and more modern version of a concentration camp. We'd be naive to think that we're immune to moving any closer to a world like that, because that's what has happened in the nearest past in human history, and it can very possibly repeat in the future. The price of freedom is constantly staying vigilant and alert to threats against it, and Jordan Peterson wants to snap us back to reality before it's too late.
Why is any of this relevant to people in the West? Well, because the technology that the Chinese Communist Party employs is an extension of Western technology. Because we already fell prey to the terrible temptation of lockdown employed by that state in the face of hypothetical crisis once and in the very recent past, because we're walking step by step in the same direction, partly because of the hypothetical convenience of universal and automatic recognition of identity, and partly because any problem whatsoever that now confronts us can easily be used to justify the increasing reach of the security and nanny state. It is said that Stone Age people, first confronted with cameras and their resultant photographs by modern anthropologists, objected to having their images captured as they feared the captivity of their souls. It turns out that such fear was prescient. The images that we leave behind while navigating virtual space are such close duplicates of our actual selves that the capture of our essence is at this point all but guaranteed. We all now have our doppelgangers. We all live so much in the virtual world in consequence of our purchasing habits and modes of electronically mediated communication that our very selves have become reducible to a frightening degree to data, the modern equivalent of our footprint, with the same data making up an image of our identity. An identity which can be and is increasingly bought and sold by the invisible corporate brokers that still mostly use it to sell us what we so desperately and carelessly and conveniently want, but that can also be used to track, monitor, and punish everything we do and say. Behavioral scientists facilitate this process with their reprehensible nudging, the practice of pushing people in a given ideologically determined direction by manipulating invisible incentives behind the scene. Corporations track purchasing decisions, developing algorithms that with increasing accuracy track our patterns of attention and action, allowing for the prediction of what might next be most enticing, doing so not only to offer us what we want, but to determine and shape what we need. Governments can and are colluding with these corporate agents to develop a picture not only of our actions, but of our thoughts and words, so that deviation from the desired end can be mapped, rewarded, and punished. With increasing ability to monitor not only the actual attention patterns and behaviors of its citizens, but to predict those that are most likely, the persecution of even potential crime becomes ever more likely. If you have nothing to hide, you will have nothing to fear, will be the slogan commandeered by those most likely to turn to surveillance to protect and control. What was the famous Soviet totalitarian joke attributed to Lavrenti Beria, head of the secret police? "Show me the man and I'll show you the crime." Those words were true enough in the time of Stalin's KGB, and the police were secret enough then as well. But that's nothing compared to what we can and likely will produce now. A police so secret that we will not even be able to detect their comprehensive and subtle activity. Monitoring crime so pervasive that everyone under the dictates of the system will have something to hide and
Order,
much to
Mr.
fear.
Chairman.
You know what's most intriguing? It's that a modern left wing that is so terrified of big corporations, their influence, and their power in the political sphere through donations would be asleep to the threats they pose to our fundamental liberties in the digital sphere. Why do you think that is? The fact is, we're sleepwalking into a new digital dystopia. Our people have no idea what they're signing up for with every device they use, every item they buy, every transaction they make, and everything they post on social media. British mathematician Clive Humby said 2 decades ago that, quote, "Data's the new oil." It seems like this vital resource is being mined through a vast digital surveillance network that will only become more interlinked and interwoven with time. And not to mention, it will be a much bigger tool of control for any potential totalitarian government. The Biden administration, for example, is defending the Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. This act grants the US government to covertly spy on any foreign national through its digital networks. It's practically a digital search warrant that doesn't need to be shown or displayed, and the fact that there's such little judicial oversight or recourse means it's incredibly easy to misuse by an intelligence agency. For example, if a foreign national under surveillance comes into contact with an American citizen, it's very easy for that digital tracking to bleed out into more and more individuals, even if they're constitutionally protected American citizens with their rights to privacy. Back in March of 2022, the Biden administration also enacted the Executive Order 14067, which takes the first steps towards the United States government adopting blockchain technology into the financial sphere, with a potential future launch of CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies. Imagine a future where cash and digital money is phased out, replaced by cryptocurrencies issued by the government that can be controlled and tracked in real time. That's the scary future that even Donald Trump was warned against by Vivek Ramaswamy, leading to him promising a ban on the very dangerous digital dollar if it was ever brought forward by the Federal Reserve. All things considered, there's just one overarching truth. We're living in the first time that technology has allowed a true digital dystopia to exist, and governments, spy agencies, and corporations are pouncing on the opportunity to make that happen. For someone like Jordan Peterson, China's the perfect example of what we must not become. And the only hope that we have of fighting against this new form of tyranny in our own lands is to wake everyone else up to what we're walking into.